Well, this is something I've never done before. Looney Tunes, as it applies to TTRPG, creating scenarios using things you extract from a work of fiction. Saying, one of the things I often talk about in the Star Trek videos I've been doing is uh, extracting information from the various Star Trek episodes to find things in it that you could use as story seeds for a work of your own. Well, for this particular one, I'm going to use one of the most famous Duck Dodgers cartoons ever made. Well, I guess you say one of the most famous Looney Tune cartoons ever made, because quite frankly, it's the first Duck Dodgers cartoon. See, this, while it is a spoof of science fiction, is not a spoof of Star Trek. It's Buck Rogers that's being spoofed. Something that I've watched a handful of episodes of and only have a small passing familiarity with it. But as a spoof of Buck Rogers, the people who made Duck Dodgers abstracted a whole lot of things and just didn't, feel the need to fully explain the setting. They just threw out a glamour to let people know what they're spoofing, and thus people would automatically key off of that and just run with it. And they did certainly have some changes, because the Duck Dodgers version has a lot of things that's similarities with the Jetsons, and I'm not entirely sure how many of those are things that are unique to Duck Dodgers and thus differentiate it from Buck Rogers. But anyways, I didn't actually research that. I just looked at this specific cartoon as its own thing, and adding additional context by collecting information from Buck Rogers, maybe later if I revisit this. So let's move on. So this begins as a simple fetch quest. Like, the entire structure of this short animated film is much like a TTRPG fetch quest. You have a beginning where an important non-player character tells you to go do something, and you and your team take off to go do the thing that you were told to do. In this case, look around in uncharted space for a planet that is somehow known to exist and believed to have a vitally important resource in order to stabilize the global economy, because, well, the global economy just needs this resource to keep going. Because this is Looney Tunes, the name of the vitally important mineral resource is the shaving cream atom. Is it only used for shaving cream? I'm going to guess no, if we're being logical, but then again, this is Looney Tunes. However, for the purposes of this breakdown, I'm not going to stick to just what it would be for Looney Tunes, but what you could adapt the concepts for when making other works of your own that are simply similar to this and not directly copying it. So, I mean, there's a whole variety of things that you could put in there. And because in the fact that in this particular context, we do have the idea of alien civilizations that aren't necessarily friendly. So the idea that maybe possibly uh, they need this to build starships, hey, you know what? That's a valid logic. And even though they call it the shaving cream atom, that's not necessarily used only for that. Could, maybe some sort of lubricant for starship drives or something. Who knows? I don't know. It's literally not explained in this episode at all. IQ High tells Daffy that we need it and that the only known source is over there. And we need you to go find it and claim it as a property of Earth so that we can extract it and utilize it for the benefit of humankind. So off he goes. Obviously, when he gets to Planet X, he runs into Marvin the Martian, who is the leader of a Martian delegation. They do not explain why the Martians are here. However, the Martians are here to, well, annex Planet X as part of Mars's territory, and thus prevent the humans from being able to extract the resources they so vitally need. If Planet X looks like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, well, I'm going to get back to that in a little bit. Yeah, the episode ends with Planet X exploding because Marvin and Daffy fight over it until there's literally nothing left to fight over. Why? Because this is something that was made in the Cold War era, and thus the whole mutually assured destruction thing was something that was fresh in everyone's mind, and the idea of fighting a war so cataclysmic that the battlefield is destroyed by the war. Yeah, people thought about that back then. Anyway, so what does Earth like? I mentioned how certain aspects of this are more like the Jetsons than the Buck Rogers show. Well, the Buck Rogers show didn't have the ability to build sets for stuff like this. They used things that look more like real buildings than the bizarre sci-fi nonsense that they have in Duck Dodgers. However, Jetsons went full bore on the sci-fi nonsense buildings. And this utilization of that actually has a number in it. Oh, another thing that's interesting here is that this is a landing platform for space taxis. That's something we'll find out later, but it's noteworthy that if you pay close attention, there's several of them in the picture. And this here is, of course, one of those space taxis. This is like the top of another platform. More platforms, more space taxis, more space taxis. I'm not sure what that platform is. They don't really explain most of them. Here we have the tops of these spires. We don't know what any of these buildings are for. And we have this. This is not a continuation of these spires. This is a different building, and I don't remember exactly what the connection between them is. However, this is the building that Daffy is flying to. Here is the space taxi that Daffy is in, arriving at his destination. Note how there are no evaporator platforms visible. These are not evaporator platforms. This is a different style of platform than the evaporator was even attached to. And when you can look at this angle here, it's clear that this has only one row of those things on the roof. This one has one on the back side in this corner here, but it doesn't have a row on the back. And here, well, whatever. My best guess as to where the evaporator platform is would be like on the back side somewhere, because it doesn't logically make sense for it to be a completely separate location. Now for something that I went to math to figure out. This is something that was completely flipping off the deep end weird that they threw in for a blink and you'll miss it sight gag. 17,000th floor. Yeah, I mathed it. if each floor is 2 meters of height, which admittedly, if you look at the ceilings in this building, 2 meters is no, but if we put each floor as 2 meters, 17,000 floors would give you approximately 24 kilometers in altitude. So that this platform here is approximately 34 kilometers above sea level. Assuming, of course, the base of the building is at sea level, which it's relatively close to compared to 34 freaking kilometers, like what, 500 feet? No one cares. Anyways, so yeah, 34 kilometers would be somewhere around here, which is quite high in the stratosphere. Shocking, isn't it? Yeah, I do not have any idea why they bothered to put this joke in here, but the fact that the math checks out amuses me greatly. At any rate, though, yeah, this is just this here, but a close-up where we can actually read the side. Yeah, old Looney Tunes, they wouldn't bother putting in unreadable details most of the time. They just would leave it look like it's a blank surface, and then, now I can see that there's something there when I get closer. Anyways, so yeah, that door right there is the one that has this bizarre security apparatus guarding it. See, this here is some sort of electronic fence. Daffy walks up to it, touches it, then the door opens. I don't know if this is an automated door opening mechanism or if it's some sort of security system. This is apparently here to scrutinize anyone who comes in to look at them. I don't know why. Presumably it's a security feature, but the episode doesn't do anything other than throw it in as a sight gag once. Also, this is a weird little sort of hallway where we literally don't see anything. It just literally just like cuts to something else. We have no idea how this architecture makes sense. Anyway, though, one thing that's noteworthy here is that several things on Earth have this arch structure to them. Like the doorway he walked in through was an arch shape. This whatever inside this room here is also an arch shape. Then you have this balcony up here above the floor that's underneath the arch. In this room, he meets with IQ High and discusses a few things. And this is a rather large room that doesn't really serve any obvious purpose other than being IQ High's personal office. What he uses it for and why he needs such a large office is uncertain. This, however, seems to be a map wall. He gets on this platform and goes up to a specific place on the map wall so that he can scrutinize in detail a specific region of space, the one that he's sending Duck Dodgers to. Then after that, Duck Dodgers goes outside and takes the evaporator to his destination, which is the spaceport. Okay, it actually says airport on the evaporator that he gets into. These work in a way similar to... part of me wants to draw a comparison to Star Trek because of the teleporters, but unlike Star Trek's teleporters, this teleportation device requires a pod at each end and seems to have a dedicated connection, which actually means it works more like the teleporter pods in the old movie The Fly than in the transporter in Star Trek. Anyways, he gets in this specific pod at whatever building that was. I think he walked out the backside of IQ High's office, but I genuinely don't know. You see him walk off screen and then walk onto screen in a different location with no feeling of how he got from point A to point B. At any rate, though, this is something noteworthy because the fact that this actually has terrain. Like this here has a proper landscape with dirt and roads and mountain sides and stuff like that. Also, this provides an establishing shot that shows that it really is nighttime here. Because it's one of the things here is that despite the fact that this is on Earth, it's so high up in the stratosphere that instead of seeing the ground and the horizon, you just see stars. But it is apparently nighttime. That's why you don't see the sun. So he. Oh, actually, notice how here this just says from tower. Just says tower. Okay, whatever. Anyways, so he gets out of the evaporator and gets into this thing at the airport. This is interesting because these are apparently metal bars. So this is kind of sort of like a fenced-in area to restrict access, I guess. Doesn't really say. Anyway, though, here we have a special launching platform where now this is something in Looney Tunes cartoons where people who haven't seen a whole lot of them or haven't paid much attention to them would get confused, I suppose. In most Looney Tunes cartoons, this is stylized as a way of depicting electricity. So this is a method of charging the batteries in his spaceship. Yes, the spaceship takes off like a rocket, but as we see, it doesn't actually use rocket engines. It just has a superficial similarity to a rocket. So this charging station that it's currently parked in, well, charging station / launching platform, it's not actually using rocket fuel. It's some sort of internal battery being charged with electricity. And as we see when his attempt at taking off goes hilariously wrong, the ship has a reverse function. And when he reverses it, it goes and embeds itself into the launching platform. This launching platform appears to be made of loose dirt, which again goes back to the whole thing of it's not rocket exhaust, because if it was rocket exhaust, it would have ripped the launching platform apart, which it doesn't. Yeah, he does take off eventually. Does no damage to the launching platform other than what happened when he put the ship in reverse on accident. Flies off into space. Now, this is the only view we get of Earth from space. Now, there are two things in here that are noteworthy except Earth. I mean, one could make the argument, it's like, why don't we see Earth's moon? Well, I mean, Earth's moon could be on the other side of Earth. But realistically, the people drawing this didn't bother to include unnecessary details like that. This, however, appears to be Mars. See, one thing I noted after watching this several times is that there's only one of the planets that you see that looks an angry red color. That one. Thing is, it's never talked about as being Mars. Might just be a coincidence. Then you also have this one over here, which I suspect might be meant to be Saturn. We do not see aliens from Saturn, however. But the idea, pondering. Yes, let's do that. Moving on. Here we have them flying past a ringed planet, and this is a good shot to establish the size of the ship. It does genuinely have a considerable amount of bulk to it. Here you have the cockpit that Duck Dodger sits in while plotting things. This is apparently, just barely large enough for one person because most of the cockpit is taken up with machinery and ship controls, and thus the amount of space devoted to sitting in is actually rather small. The rest of it, it's about the size of a school bus, I honestly would say, on the inside. Why it has this giant red wing on the top of it, no one knows. And here we have a look at it on the inside while he's preparing to launch. Note the launch platform in the background being vertical because, yeah, they tipped the thing up. Why they launched it in the up position, I guess it's just because the fact that it takes off better that way. That is actually a thing from a lot of the old sci-fi stuff is you have craft that can land and can take off while laying on their side, but when they're laying on their side, they have to turn so that they're facing upwards in order to escape a planet's gravity. They can't just fly sideways, which kind of seems to be somewhat applicable here because it always goes up if it's taking off. Okay, it only does that once, but still, it kind of like glides to a landing on the planet. It doesn't touch down on its butt. It just lands on its side. And here we have a few more shots of the interior. Because of the fact that this is old school retro sci-fi back before computerized digital displays were a thing, it doesn't have any of those. It has gauges and dials and buttons, and no one knows what any of these things do because I don't think the animators actually thought any of this through. But quite frankly, that goes in the unnecessary detail category where they put in the level of detail they felt they needed and didn't bother with anything else. A few more shots of the interior. This is noteworthy because you see out the window the tower of the launching platform. And here we have the eager young space cadet, who is kind of like his only party member. Daffy only has one party member for this mission. But it is noteworthy that the amount of space you have on the inside of this vehicle does seem to have enough room for more than one seat, if they actually bother to install more than one. Now, if you're doing this in a campaign, you would probably have more than just 2 players. Or at the very least, you would have 2 players controlling more than 2 characters. And here we have one more shot of the cockpit looking back, which establishes that there is actually an internal door separating the cockpit from the rest of the interior, which is something that you will find in a lot of real aircraft. They don't just have the cockpit as a random chunk of the interior. There is something separating it from the rest of the interior, even if it's, a minor, tiny partition. And in this case, it appears that the normal operational procedure is to leave the door open. Anyways, there's also a scene while he's failing to take off where we briefly get to see the dash from an angle looking mostly forward. Yeah, fun stuff. Anyways, so later on we also see him firing out the window using his message delivery gun. Now, this is an interesting thing because of the fact that the purpose of the message delivery gun is to communicate with the Martian without getting close to him, which is kind of sort of like a carrier pigeon, except it's, not alive. You just like chuck messages in it towards him and use this device to see to it that they get there quickly and delivered to exactly the location you want. Then, when Marvin pisses him off and he decides he's going to kill Marvin, he pulls out this bizarre doomsday device and decides to fire it. One would think, looking at this, that it's like an artillery cannon. No, this is Looney Tunes. It's nothing that rational. It is, however, an impressively large piece of equipment. It does this. It launches a group of 10 bombs so that they land next to the Martian maggot. The Martian maggot, of course, is the next thing we will look at in this analysis. Martian tech in this has certain features that you won't necessarily think about the first time you watch this, but after you rewatch it, you'll be like, hang on, wait a second. The Martian maggot is, of course, approximately the same size and a similar configuration to Duck Dodgers' ship. Oh yeah, here's a shot of the interior when the message arrives. I mean, it's a creative threat, but not a particularly compelling one. Now, it's interesting that it shows a lot of the Martian interior design being gold-colored. And here we have the Martian equivalent of Duck Dodgers' killer ray. Notice how Marvin is standing on a stack of books. This is actually a recurring thing in the movie, because of the logic here is actually that, oh yeah, actually, you know what, this is an interesting thing. This actually is the port on the ship that he fired out of when he was firing this thing. Yeah. So he fired out the backside of his ship. I don't think we see. There's presumably one also in the Martian maggot, but yeah, this is a very similar device with a very similar purpose, and the explosive yield of these is cartoonish. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I just blew. Well, this is how they blew up the planet. I mentioned that earlier. Just completely obliterates the entire planet, pulverizes it into gravel. But what I was getting at with here is that Marvin the Martian is drawn in situations that make it look like he is unusually small by Martian standards. And this actually tracks with a lot of the other things you see in Marvin the Martian cartoons from this time period, is that he's short compared to Daffy. Actually, here, there's a picture where you have, like, see here, he's short compared to Daffy. Even with the helmet, he only comes up to Daffy's shoulder. But if we go way back here, looking at a comparison of IQ High and Daffy, Daffy comes up to IQ High's shoulder, which means that Marvin would only come up to about where his IQ High's hand is, which would mean that Marvin might be 3 feet tall, which logically kind of connects to how the stuff is depicting him. Is that it's normal for Martians to be something like 6 or 7 feet tall. Marvin is 3. No explanation is ever given for why that is, but it is an aspect of his character. He is unusually small even by Martian standards. No explanation given, but again, when looking at Martian stuff is all made for someone of what is by Martian standards normal size, and normal size is somewhere around 6 or 7 feet tall. Anyways, moving on. So, what is Planet X? Now, this is something I alluded to earlier, in that we are never given any particularly solid information about the nature of Planet X, how the humans know where it is, because it's not explained at all. Nothing of any kind is explained. And now here's another thing that's interesting. Comparing the star charts here, there is no comparison. You don't see enough star chart to compare it. One thing that is an idea that probably isn't actually true is that the area marked unknown here is the same as the middle area on here that doesn't have anything marked in it. It's like this is an area of space that is known to exist, but no one from Earth has mapped that region of space, so we don't know what is in that region of space. Daffy comes up with this ludicrous plan that basically involves flying in squiggly lines for probably several weeks. Even Daffy thinks his plan is ludicrous and nonsense. But the eager young space cadet's like, we could just follow these planets that have these convenient letters on them, which by real world standards is complete nonsense. But hey, it's Looney Tunes. Also, there's another thing with this, though, is that from a realistic standpoint, players would have the opportunity to ask IQ High for all of the information that he had, and the internal logic of the way this mission is granted, IQ High would probably have actually given Duck Dodgers a lot more than just go find Planet X and literally just leave it at that. He would probably have given Duck Dodgers all of the information that he actually has on Planet X. And, if it's like logs from some survey expedition that didn't properly chart anything and was just making note of the fact that they located planets that for some unknowable reason have letters marked on them. That's the other funny thing, is that the letters are real. That's what the planets actually look like. No, there is no explanation for that because Looney Tunes, but there is. And if you're doing this in a more realistic perspective, you would have the survey notes that are, partial information, contain information about the planets that's some sort of identifying traits that's not something as boringly obvious as having a letter as their main terrain feature for the entire planet. Actually, it's worse than that. I'll get to that later. Also, yeah, he just starts with A and presumably goes all the way along the list until he gets to X. You actually see briefly a planet Z, but yeah, like I said, extremely briefly. And planet X, it apparent that the blue part is water. Get closer, yeah, it's like an X-shaped continent in an ocean of water. That's what it looks like, anyways. Note how even the trees are X-shaped somehow. Also, that's the only species of life seen on the planet, although we do see a large number not large number, but a significant number of them. They are scattered all over the place. But again, it's the only life form we actually see on the planet. The fact that it's somehow X-shaped is, like I said, strange. Again, it makes the entire planet feel artificial, especially when you have this giant X as a landing marker. Like, this doesn't even look like it's part of nature. The trees, while bizarre, feel like they could at least be natural. It's like real world species sometimes do have very regular shapes they grow into. They don't, a lot of them have a certain pattern by which they grow that causes them to naturally take on certain shapes. Okay, this thing for some reason likes to grow in a shape where it has 4 branches and then spreads out sideways from there. Okay. This doesn't look natural by even Looney Tune standards. This looks like something someone put there as a marker. And if I remember right, this is actually close to the center of the X. So, anyways. Again, we see more terrain here. See just how many of these X-shaped trees there are. Oh yeah, also a bit of space vistas. Like, these appear to be meant to be the other numbered planets. One of them planet K actually does have a ring around it, which is probably an okay thing. I don't know. And here, of course, we have the showdown between Marvin and Daffy again, which goes into the whole idea of having military weaponry in this setting. Is like, they use ray guns to try to kill each other. Legitimately try to kill each other with ray guns, because this is an old school Looney Tunes cartoon back when murder was absolutely an option. After a brief shootout, we learn a few things about how these disintegration rays work. Daffy actually does get disintegrated, and because Looney Tunes cartoon, he gets reintegrated by his eager young space cadet and thus doesn't actually die. Note how the disintegration proof vest is red. He's wearing it under his green jacket. That's presumably his space uniform. Again, that's one of those sci-fi tech things, is that the idea of having gun-shaped objects that you can use to heal people, that's a thing you see in quite a few pieces of technology. Like Star Trek has several devices that are kind of sort of analogous to that are shaped and sized in a way that you could carry them around the same way you could carry around a phaser. They aren't actually something that you just shoot someone with, but this is not a particularly large step removed from what they do actually use. Oh yeah, and here's another thing that's something else that's particularly striking. This is what is seemingly the largest mountain in this area, possibly on the entire planet, because the planet really doesn't seem to be all that large. This has an X-shaped cloud. Yeah, it's an X-shaped cloud forming around this mountain peak. No, I am not going to try to explain that one. It just exists. Again, the whole letter to planets thing feels very artificial. I mean, if I was going to do an actual TTRPG game, doing something loosely inspired by this, I would give the planets some sort of common trait that isn't something as superficial as an X shape, especially when it's an X shape that applies to seemingly everything on the planet. Like X-shaped trees, X-shaped clouds, X-shaped continents. Actually, we only know of one continent. We never see the planet from the other side. Which also begs the question of, if that's true of planet X, what about the other ones? Is this a planet that only has one L-shaped continent? Does it have L-shaped trees on the continent? Yeah, and of course that goes for the rest of them, all the way from A to Z. We don't know. Is this ring made out of a bunch of case floating around in a circle? We don't know. Oh, and that's enough being silly. Again, it's Looney Tunes. The majority of it is jokes. The plot is paper thin, but the plot is built on a foundation using concepts from serious science fiction, albeit it covers them with a layer of jokes that makes it, not obviously something that you could actually find a use for. And, I wouldn't go so far as to have someone go all the way from A to X trying to find something. But, finding something that points them in the right direction to find what they're looking for, that you can do without going to such a large number of pit stops. And that's all, folks. See you next time.